So in the previous episode, we discussed why the paranormal matters and why you should bring that into your worldview. I think today we should talk about why, or what is the biblical worldview. And I think we need to lay some ground rules out, because in the world we live in today, there may be some things that should be self-evident but aren't. And then there's also a few topics that may not be as self-evident, and maybe you haven't even had in your worldview. It doesn't mean you're not a Christian. This isn't the worldview you have to be a Christian, but you do have to have it to have a truly biblical worldview. And the first point should be kind of self-evident, but sadly isn't, is God. God is a self-existent, omnipotent, and all-powerful being. He is distinct from his creation. He is not a part of it. He is above it. He is beyond it. He is the one that created the material and the supernatural universe. He is the one who is the prime mover. No one is beside him. No one else is co-equal. There is only God. Everything else is coming from him. And the second aspect of that point is he created those universes to have a relationship with the beings within them. Meaning, he created the material universe to have a relationship with us. He created the supernatural universe to have a relationship with them. These are not accidents. These were not just something he did on a lark. He created these universes specifically for the purpose of having relationships with the beings within them. We are his family, and we are expressions of his handiwork. The next point would be Adam and Eve, to be honest. Now, there are a lot of ways to slice this particular pie, and we will go over the future, whether or not, should we consider Adam to be a special creation, or is he simply the creation of a priestly class with humans that were brought up through, again, divine intervention, but still through a more natural process. We'll go over all those techniques and those theories in a later episode, but you do need to believe, whether you believe in theistic evolution or special creation, that there was an Adam. There was a human who represented all of humanity before God, and that representative was deceived by a supernatural being that we will call Satan, and that's how we sort of refer to him now, but that he was there. There was a deception. There was a separation of God and man, that sin entered into our world through this Adam. You do have to. Sin could not have been something created by. It cannot have been something that just sort of accidentally showed up. We had to have a representative. We had to make that failure. Now, third point is a little controversial, because for most people, this hasn't been talked about, or it may not even have been in your head. Like I said, you don't have to have this in your head to be saved, but to have a truly biblical worldview, you got to think about Genesis 6. You got to think about. You don't necessarily need to think that there were actual literal giants. We will discuss again in future details what this entails. But whether you think they were giants, whether you think there was something else going on, you do need, however, to have in your head supernatural beings interacting with humanity and creating something new. The Nephilim cannot have been just people with political stature. It can't just be that. There has to be a little bit more to it. Jude, 1 Peter, and Jesus's entire ministry of driving out demonic spirits, all of that's coming from this event. There's a lot here. This is a key that unlocks a lot of scripture. So on at least some level, you need to believe that when Genesis 6, it says the sons of God, it means the sons of God. Like I said, in a very near future episode, we will go over this in much more detail. But for now, we're just setting sort of a framework. The next point is the flood. You don't necessarily need to agree with me that this was a worldwide event per se. And again, even what worldwide means can have a couple different meanings. But there does need to be a Noah. There does need to be an ark. There does need to be an event of truly cataclysmic proportions. Again, Jesus refers to Noah. This has to have happened at least in some way. This has to be, this is emblematic of something. And again, future, we'll go over a lot of the details and why I have the position I have. But yes, you do need to think that there was a Noah. God did intervene to save him and his family. And that this wasn't just an annual yearly flood. This was a cataclysmic event that was used by God for his own purposes. This is just a thing. The next one probably seems a little off kilter for a bit, but I would recommend you go to Michael Heiser's work, specifically because the Tower of Babel, it's not just about the separation of languages. If you think that's a mythological position, okay, fine. I would tend to disagree. But the real significance of the Tower of Babel, and it probably didn't look like that, right? It was probably ziggurat, is that this is the event where mankind is divorced from God. Again, Michael Heiser's work is key to this. But this is where God separates himself from us. Because we see all throughout Genesis up to that point, God is interacting directly with man. Now he's not. This is where the gods of the nations are sort of start to come into play. This is when God divorces mankind, gives us over to these other spirits, and a new journey is starting. So again, when does this occur? Was it a ziggurat? Conversation for another time. But there was an event, and God did separate himself from humanity. And now we have these other princes, these other supernatural beings over every single nation. The next 3 points are ultimately 1 point, which is the creation of the nation of Israel. There has to have been an Abraham. There needs to be a person that God chose to build a nation out of essentially nothing. It's a recreation story, him with Isaac. So there does need to be an Abraham, someone that God chooses and starts to create this nation out of. There needs to be a Moses. There needs to be the person who helps to really turn the nation into a nation. There needs to be the lawgiver. There needs to be the person who is the foundation upon which this new religious and civil authority rests. And then there needs to be a David. Have to exist. There needs to be the king that God says, this is the line, it's coming through. He writes the Psalms. This is the promised throne that, again, our next point is going to sit on. But there does need to be David. Abraham, Moses, David, these three people need to have existed. And they had to play their roles in the creation of the nation of Israel, through whom Jesus would come. And this is where we lose our Jewish friends. But Jesus is the promised Messiah. He lived. He was crucified. He was dead. He was then resurrected. And he has ascended to the right-hand throne of God. That's the view you have to have. We can talk about Trinitarianism. We can talk about modalism. We'll talk about all that in the future. But to have a biblical worldview, you have to believe that Jesus came, that he was the Messiah, he was crucified, and rose again. Moreover, I would suggest if you miss this last point, then you still don't have a biblical worldview. He's coming back, and he will fix this planet. He will rule. Now, again, there's plenty of very good Christians who are, who believe that a lot of the things from the book of Revelation happened back then, but that he is still going to come. So the millennial kingdom is a different view for them. That's fine. You don't necessarily have to be You don't necessarily have to believe that all of the entirety of the book of Revelation is in the future, but you do need to believe that Jesus is still going to come, that he has not yet returned. If you think that he's not coming back, then you're not, even if you have all those other points, you don't have a biblical worldview. So, to sum up, the sort of baseline biblical worldview is God, self-existent, created the universe to be with us. There was an Adam and Eve. There was a Genesis 6 event. There was a flood. There was a Tower of Babel. There was an Abraham. There was a Moses. There was a David. And there was definitely Jesus. And that he is coming back to set things right. That's the biblical worldview. Now, why is that important? Why those things specifically? Well, I would suggest that the biblical worldview is important to have because it actually explains what we encounter every single day in our lives. Not just the paranormal stuff, not just the weird stuff, but everything. I would suggest that all of the conflict that we're seeing in the world around us is not really about politics or culture or philosophy. It's ultimately worldview. Because philosophy, culture, and politics are the children of worldview. That's it. If you have a biblical worldview, then that is going to inform your politics. It's going to inform the culture you create. It's going to inform the philosophies of the universe that you put into play, whether it's economics or about education or about anything. The conflict that we're seeing in the world today is ultimately over worldview. Everything else is just how it actually plays out in the world around us. And if your worldview is not biblical, then it has holes. I would suggest some pretty big holes. If you don't believe that God is a self-existent, omnipotent, all-powerful being, maybe you don't think he'll judge you at the end. If you don't think there is an afterlife, if you don't think Jesus is coming back, that's going to determine how you live your life. I would suggest look throughout history for a little bit, and you'll find that some of the worst things that have ever happened were done by people who did not believe that Christ was coming back. They didn't believe in a God, or at least not the God of the Bible. They didn't think they would have to pay for anything. They didn't think that humanity was special at all, that we were accidents, that we were cattle. Many people today still do, and we see it play out all over the world. I would suggest there are people who have lost their faith because they didn't have a truly biblical worldview. They had a worldview that, again, not that they weren't Christian, but was more acceptable to the modern world. So when they ran across something that didn't fit in their modern world, didn't fit in what the atheist told them the universe looked like, they rejected God at the same time. Because, well, my worldview can't account for this weird thing that I've encountered, and therefore my worldview is wrong, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. Problem was, you didn't have a worldview to begin with that was correct. For a worldview to be correct, it needs to account for even the weird things. There can't be anomalies in a worldview. There can be rarities, but not an anomaly. What I'm trying to say is that this channel is going to do a lot of focusing on things like the beginning of the book. We're going to talk about creation. We're going to talk about cryptozoology. We're going to talk about forbidden archaeology. Things that revolve the beginning of the book. And we're going to talk about eschatology. We're going to talk about things that happen at the end. We are going to talk about Revelation 12. We are going to talk about potential reemergence of the Nephilim, prophetic kingdoms, all of those things. Because we're going to focus at the end of the book, beginning of the book, and the end of the book are true. That means the middle of the book is true. And I'll be honest, The middle of the book is where we live every day. So yeah, we're going to talk about the beginning. And we're going to talk about the end. But not because those are ends and of themselves, but because the middle of the book is what matters. The middle of the book is where you are. The middle of the book is where he is.